Well, I decided to run because, in a general sense, you know, I'm a supporter of public education and public schools. And being a little bit academic, you know, I think public schools offer things that, I'll say, non-public schools do not. On the one hand, they bring everybody together. There's a common experience in a public school. Now, I say this a little tongue-in-cheek because it doesn't always work out so well, but that's what it does. On the other hand, there's also a diversity. So you're common and you're exposed to diverse things. And in non-public schools, you're often not. They're segregated by sex or race or income or lots of things. And that's the way it is. But that's one reason that I support public schools. I'm a product of public schools. My children, which I have 4, are a product of public schools. And so that's why. I decided to run more specifically in Duluth because I've been here about 20 years now. And I have 2 younger children, who have been in Duluth public schools since kindergarten. Well, they went to ECFE, but I was not involved in that too much. They've been at Congdon, and now both will be at Ordine East Middle School. So I have 2 adolescents, which presents issues too sometimes. So they've been there, and since they've been in kindergarten, I've been involved in their schooling. I volunteered in kindergarten. Mrs. John was the teacher. She just retired. Has been there 4 years. Great teacher. And up through last year at grade 7 at Ordine, I was volunteering in the, I don't know if they call it biology. We were dissecting frogs with my daughter, which was an issue in and of itself. The morning of that, it was, oh, you can't go, you're my dad, screaming, yelling, crying. My wife had to drive her to school. But I went, because that's what dads are supposed to do. And at the end of the 3rd day, she said, are you going to come back again? So it worked out okay.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. I also learned, walking through the ground floor of Ordine, that 8th grade students are much bigger than I remember. They were huge. Yeah. I'm small, but they're huge. So I've done all that. I've also been active in PTAs at Ordine and Congdon. And I've been a district PTA, the PTSA board. I've been a member of that board. I attended the PTA state convention 2 years ago and gave a little gender diversity to that. There weren't too many of us males there. But it was very interesting and informative. So I've done those kinds of things. My wife and I organized a running club at Congdon. We had 80 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders running twice a week this past spring, and she's done that before. So I've been involved in those kinds of things. I've been to more parent-teacher conferences than I wish to talk about. I have 2 older children, 37 and 38, I think. And I was involved in their schooling. They went to school in a small town in Minnesota and then in Madison when I lived there. I mention this only because it involves some interest in school. My daughter, who we adopted, had a stroke when she was born. We didn't know that. I mean, that's not why we adopted her, but it was there. So the point is that I was involved in a lot of special needs conversations, I'll say, with the school districts, and it's made me aware of those issues and difficulties that parents have and kids have. So I've been involved in the schools, and running for the school board and getting involved now that I'm retired seemed in some ways a logical extension of that and my interest. Before I became a physician, I obtained a PhD in educational administration from the University of Chicago. And for, I think, 5, 6, 7 years, I taught at the university level and was involved in research and interests surrounding education. So that's another reason that education's been running through my career and interest since college, really. So that's why I'm running what my interest in education is. My background, I was raised in Montana, actually. up till 6th grade. And I think I would call you. We were setting this up. I was out there. My mother still lives there, my sister. But I went to public school in St. Paul, West St. Paul. And after my PhD in Chicago, I went to teach in Canada for about, well, I was going to be 2 years. It ended up 10, and I changed careers and went to medical school there. It's, people do strange things. So I was a family physician in a small town in Minnesota, Long Prairie. For a while, I was in Madison, working with group health and at the university, with the residents there. And then for the past 1997, I moved to Duluth, so I've lived here since then. And I've been at St. Luke's. I had a clinic in Superior, but did all of our hospitalizations. Well, initially we did them everywhere, but recently it's been at St. Luke's.
Sure.
St. Luke's.
Well, you've been in Duluth long enough to recognize or be aware of the infighting, the toxic atmosphere that's on our existing Duluth School Board. Feel free to take sides if you want, but more importantly, how can you bring civility and discourse, or how do you think you can, to the proceedings so the board can effectively work together?
Well, I think that my background has involved lots of conflict. I've been chief of staff of a hospital. As I said, I was chairman of the Department of Family Practice for 15 years and on the executive board at St. Luke's. And I could probably know there's lots of consternation and conflict in medicine. It's not all everybody agrees on what's going on. So I've had to deal with that, and it's given me experience, and I think age does too. It tells you, what you can do, what you can't do. A board member can't fix things, but they're one part of a larger board that if you work together and have consensus, you can do this. I'm aware of some of the consternation that's gone on. I can't say that I'm taking sides necessarily. There's always two sides, or probably more than that, to every dispute. You learn that too. But I think that my experience on boards helps. And I know through my work in the school, I've worked with administrators, some board members, teachers, developed some relationships that I think help when you're dealing with these kinds of things. So I think that I'll be able to not fix it, but
Maybe
hopefully be a positive thing.
Rise above it a little bit.
Rise above it. I think that we need to, the Duluth schools have a great history. They've done a lot of things. A lot of things are out of their control. But if the board can, or the school system, I'll put it that way, maybe specifically the board can be more positive. I don't like the word market, but show the good things they're doing. They can get better community support for it, and I think that will help the school district, and it will help the city as a whole. My kids, the last two, are swimmers. I'm not, but they are, and they've been involved first at the Y and now with the Lake Superior Swim Club, and they use the Ordine and the Lincoln Park pools. And we were at I was at a swim meet this past winter timing, and there were 8, I think, teams from around the state, several from the cities, and I remember one guy I was timing with from one of the suburbs saying, "Oh, this is great, we're going to come up here again." That the facilities and the use of those things can bring people to Duluth. They give it a good image. People like that stuff, and I think that we can do more. I think we could do more of that kind of thing.
But adding to that, or building on that, you mentioned the good things the district is doing. What are some examples that we could, in addition to that we could build on?
Well, I think that the community school concept, Myers-Wilkins community school has done great things. Obviously, there are problems with achievement differences, enrollment differences. I cannot tell people where to live. I can't do those kinds of things. I can't cure poverty. If I could make $1 million tomorrow. This is not unique to Duluth. I mean, every school system in the country is probably dealing with these things. But getting the community involved, as they've done at Myers-Wilkins, trying to give students who do have issues with poverty and parents who have problems. You can't make kids get enough sleep. You can't make parents read to their kids. But to the degree that getting the whole community involved in other organizations to help attenuate some of these issues is great. And right now, it takes money. I don't want to use that as an excuse. You deal with the money you got, and that's what you need to do. But I think getting more sites involved in those kinds of projects, I'll say, or community schools would be a very good thing, and they've done that. We have great facilities, and people say, well, that doesn't make a difference. Some of them. Well, recently there was a young woman from I call it the Bug School near Cass Lake. I can never say the name of it. But I know she went to, I think to Washington, and was saying, our school is falling apart, we can't learn. Well, we don't have that. We have great facilities, and that's not an issue. Kids are safe, or they should be. We have, the district's put in place a bullying policy that had community input, and that's a good thing. And if it's not followed, well, then people should be held accountable, or it should be changed if it's not working. But those are things I think are really helping. We have students that do all kinds of wonderful things. The robotics, the team at East did great. So there are people that are really doing well. I think we need to emphasize that too. Not diminishing all the problems. I mean, there are, but let's not just focus on it.
You touched on the equity issue. There are more students at East, so it's a little overcrowded. Fewer students, fewer maybe classes and opportunities at Denfeld and also at the middle schools. You're not saying, are you saying there really isn't anything we can do about that? Or what?
I'm not saying there's nothing we can do. I'm saying it's not easy. Changing boundaries is difficult. Closing schools is difficult.
Oh, yeah.
It's an issue that's going to have to be revisited and constantly discussed. This past winter, I went with the Cub Scouts, my son was a Cub Scout, to a winter camping thing up near Ely, and the counselor was a recent graduate from New Trier High School in Chicago area. I don't know if anybody of you know that, it's a northern suburb. And I said, well, nice kid. I said, how many kids in your class? Well, there were 1,000 that graduated with me. Oh, really? How many kids in the school? 4,000. And I said, well, how many languages did they offer? Well, 8, and he named them off. The point being that, if you had, I'm not saying you should one high school here, but if you had a bigger school, there's more options available. Now, there's always opportunity costs, and you've got to then say, well, people are going to have to travel more. But those are options I think need to be, not that particular specific one, but options have to be put on the table and talked about. My own feeling is I think the kids are not as uptight about it as the parents are. Like lots of places. Well, I went to Benfield, and my kid's going to go there. I went to East, and okay. But I don't think, at least my kids, say, where are you going? They don't care. They are looking, and they have friends, and they want to do what's best for them and what they like. So, I don't have an answer to that, obviously. Or if I did, nobody would listen to me. But I think that it's something that I'd be willing to discuss. I mean, we have to discuss it. The district, as my understanding, tries to offer courses everywhere. When we went to university, did you get the same course when you wanted it every time? No. I mean, you have to make some adjustments, and I think that's going to have to be done too. But it's an issue that people are concerned about, and it needs to be addressed. I'm not dismissing it at all.
Well, another difficult issue is a question of Edison and the charter school, and the concern that it's going to drive more students away. And there was recently a big public meeting about that, led by Representative Simonson. What do you think the district can do to deal with the impact of the new Edison High School opening in a couple of years?
Well, I'm not a fan of charter schools. I'll say that. I mean, they're legal. I think Minnesota had the first charter school in the country in 1991. I'm and people make decisions to send their kids where they want to. You have to do what's best, what you think is best for your kids.
Of course.
But charter schools take money that would otherwise go to the public schools. They don't have the same accountability to the taxpayers as public schools do. Their boards are appointed, not elected and run for office. I think that, personally, the setting up of a high school here will be more difficult than is thought. For example, with I don't know how many students they anticipate having, but if you've got one chemistry class, you have to find a teacher who can teach one class. Well, that's difficult. Teachers are difficult to find. In the New York Times this last weekend, I think there was an article that was talking about the shortage of teachers nationwide. I think they focused on Charlotte, North Carolina. They're looking for 200 teachers. Because of the economic downturn, the large debt that kids have going to school, that people aren't going into teaching. They'll go for more remunerative occupations. And that's especially true of teachers of color and diverse students, or diverse teachers. It's interesting, if I can be a little academic, that teachers tend to go to schools and to places where they grew up or in districts they were like. Bill Gronsfeld said at some meeting I was at that I can't remember the exact numbers, but I don't know, 75% of the teachers at Denfeld went to Denfeld. I mean, people return to their roots. So if we're looking for diverse teaching staff, we're going to have to get our own, and they're going to come from here. They're not, and I think Edison's going to have more of a problem than the schools. Duluth public schools, at least, have a very experienced and well-educated, master's degree teaching force. Now you can say, well, I think it's good. I mean, there's some things you want new teachers to new ideas and things like that, but they have a very good teaching force. And my kids' teachers have some good, some not so good, but generally quite good. And I think that that's a strength that the public schools have. They have a wide variety of programs and things they can offer that the charter school can't. Looking at one measure, which is test scores, I don't want to focus on that, but looking on that with the Edison, it's not a primary school, but not the high school, the other school, they're no better than, or as good as the public schools. So I think that one is going to be more difficult than they think, and two, I think that the response is that we just have to say, all right, here's what we have to offer, and here's what we can offer, and it's a lot of good things. Let's do that.
Do our schools open at a good time of day, or do they start at a good time? Or
Christopher, my youngest son, got up at I don't know what time to be a crossing guard. It was very early. I thought retirement was meant I could sleep, but no. At middle school and high school, they start later. And there's a lot of research recently. I think the CDC just came out with another study showing it. Middle and high school kids do much better if they start later in the day, 8:30, and they do here. But I think that that's an issue and another thing that could be looked at. Now there's lots of issues around that. Parents who have or don't have daycare and jobs and things like that. So it affects a lot of people. But in terms of learning and kids being awake and achieving, I think later starts in the day are important. It seemed to be more in the public eye these days.
Do you know how many meetings a year a school board member is expected to attend?
How many meetings? Well, there's one a month, and then there are other committees. I know a lot of the school members attend all the committees, whether they're an active member of them or not. A lot of the information that you receive is not at the school board meeting, but it's at the business meeting or the education meeting and things like that, where the staff is there and the administration that gives you input and answers questions that the board has given them to answer so they can get information. And then there's, you know, I don't know, I suppose it varies by the board member, but some of them, I think, go to every meeting they can, and some have other lives and don't go to as many. That's like any board, but quite a few. I know that, well, you would know, running for office is more meetings than I. I have a great respect for anybody who does this now. Much more respect, really. It's a lot of work. The last thing I ran for was student council president.
How'd that go?
But I won.
Yeah.
But I was in prison. But so I don't know how many, but there's one a month plus the, depends how many committees, 2 or 3 meetings in addition to that as well.
Plus additional research.
Plus additional research,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
Dr. Kirby, you mentioned diverse teaching ranks, and that's sometimes talked about the need for that in closing achievement gaps and, you know, lowering or improving graduation rates among students of color. Can you talk a little bit about those issues? We had some racial issues at Denfeld last year, and we've had some other, you know, the achievement gap and how that can be narrowed.
Well, I think that in terms of diverse teaching staff, as I said, it's difficult because everybody's looking for diverse teaching staff, and teachers tend to come from where they grew up and went to school.
Sure.
So this not being a really diverse area, I think that working with the local community organizations and with the teacher training institutions, it's a long-term answer, I know, but to try and encourage kids of color and others to go into teaching would help. If you can give teachers time, smaller classes so they can individualize instruction to individual learning styles, all that will help. That takes money, and I think that the levy has helped that, and the district has tried to put money into that, but it takes a lot.
Yeah.
And so one of the things a school board member can do as well is to be a proponent of saying, look, if you want good schools in a good city, you have to, it's going to cost some money, but it's worth the investment. We have to do that. So utilizing the Myers-Wilkins community school concept, and I think well, I know the state legislature this year not gave, but allocated money for that. Not a lot. I think they asked for $5 million. They got $500,000 for the whole state. But what the Myers-Wilkins board and director are trying to do is make sure that what happens at Myers-Wilkins, which has been a success, goes on to Lincoln and Denfeld, so that these kids are followed through. They don't have all this help and success in elementary school and then, oh, sorry, it's the end. And so I think that's another thing that we can do. Making sure that as much as you can, I mean, the same courses are offered, but it's not as easy to get those at times. I mean, you have to deal with that and do what you can do. And you rely on, the administrators and the teachers to help out in that. It's not the board that's going to say, do this. I mean, we set policy and say, all right, here's what we need answers for. Let's give us some, and we can kind of decide what might be best.
The districts face some financial challenges. Some of that contributing to that is the inability to sell Central High School site and a couple other properties in town. What do you think the district could be doing more or better to help get these properties sold?
I can't give a good answer to that because I'm not involved in that. I'm not a real estate person. Yeah. I would think that given all the money involved in the properties, they're doing what they can. It's not a great real estate market right now, especially with the downturn of the economy. It was difficult. There are 6 houses within my block that are for sale. There's a lot of people, and they haven't moved. My next door neighbor was trying, and he hasn't had 2 people, I think. So it's difficult in general. Sometimes, as I told my neighbor, all it takes is one person wants that house, and that's it. It takes one person that wants that property. Okay, let's do it. Now you're going to have to discuss with communities they're in and things like that. But I can't tell you how to sell them. I think once they are, it'll be good, because that's an asset that's sitting there that could be used elsewhere. But
well, we've talked about a lot of issues, but what do you see as kind of the top challenge or the top issue facing the district? What would be like one of your high priorities?
My priorities? I think they all parlay into each other, but I think one of my priorities is to be positive and get the city or the community behind the public schools again. Not to focus on all of the consternation and attention to peripheral issues. I mean, I think everyone agrees that achievement and student learning are what the schools are about, and that's what they want. So let's focus on that. I think if we could be more positive, we'll get more support. Indirectly, more support means better financial support, better community support, and that will help. So I would try to tell people, as a board member, I'm one of many, 7 actually, and I'll try to be positive and work with the other ones as best we can to get on that goal of increasing achievement and learning, making the experience best for the students and the teachers. I'm not in the school. I mean, those people who are in the trenches, the teachers and the paraprofessionals and those kind of positions are who really do it. We need to support them, and they need to know, and I think they'll do a better job, just have more enthusiasm, if they know people are behind them and they're not concerned about peripheral issues. So I think that that will help. It'll help indirectly achievement differences, call them opportunities rather than problems. You could give them a $5 million, and some would say, well, that's not enough, and other people would say, well, boy, let's what we can do with this. That would be, let's see what we can do with this and make a better difference.
Should we be going to electronic books completely?
Personally, no. One of the biggest conflicts in our house is electronic devices. It is a huge issue. I think that, well, they certainly have some advantages. In general, I would say no. Partially that's because I like a hard newspaper to read. They certainly have some advantages in getting things out quickly. You can not waste paper, all of those kind of things. You can update them more quickly. But looking at my children and myself to a degree, and probably all of us, we get easily distracted by electronic devices. And I think that in one sense, the benefit of the book is, it's there, that's what you've got, so that will help. It's also very expensive. Electronic medical records in hospitals have not been the panacea that everybody thinks they are. If you ask physicians, you get a much different answer than non-physicians. And I'm not saying that electronic books would be the same way, but there's lots of problems. I think it's too early to say, yeah, that's what we need. They have their place. I can see where they'd be useful, but I'm not here to say, yeah, I think that's what we should do.
Dr. Kirby, just have a couple more minutes.
Sure.
If anyone else has anything, but otherwise, obviously, clearly you want to win and become a school board member. Why should voters?
I won high school. I finally keep going.
Why should voters support you?
Well, I think they should support me because of my varied background, which includes education, my involvement. I've been involved in the schools here, and as I said, have some relationships, and I don't mean to say good or bad, I mean just know people, and that always helps. Having relationships builds trust, and you get to know people. So I have that. I have experience on boards, so I know how a board works and what a board member can or can't do, or should not do. And I like to think of myself as open-minded and willing to talk to anybody and listen to what they have to say. And I think that I bring that more than some of the other candidates. I'm not running against anybody. I'm just kind of, I would rather say, this is what I'm for and this is what I can do. And I want to make the schools for my kids and for all kids, because if all kids do well, my kids do well. I think the diversity and the variety of experiences they get in the public schools is great. Duluth has traditionally good schools. They still do. There are problems, but they have good schools, and I want to help support that.